We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets.
I have the body of a weak and feeble woman.
All men are created equal. Because I have a dream.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello everybody, welcome to our next episode of ModsPod. Today we are with Louie in Year 8, who is going to talk about the Cold War.
So, first of all, the Russian Revolution sort of into Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution was when there were several different revolutions, but the main one came in, I think, February of 1917.
17, yeah.
And with Lenin, who sort of took over, and I'm not 100% sure the sort of things he did.
So these are the Bolsheviks, the communists, who are a bit unhappy with the royal family.
Yeah.
Why are they unhappy with the royal family? What have they done to them?
Well, they were all the sort of Russian peasants were starving and sort of in a lot of debt. They were just sort of partying,
Like living it up.
yeah, and feasting, and quite similar to what the French royal family was doing during sort of French Revolution.
So that alleged Marie Antoinette when she said, "Let them eat cake."
Yeah.
Whether she said that or not, we don't know. So I suppose going back to 1905, in the Bloody Sunday, so the peasants went to the castle, the palace, and asked for some food, and were met with bullets instead.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where this idea of a revolution started, and they got angry and over the years.
Yeah, so with a Bloody Sunday, I think, is that the one with the, I think he was a priest?
So are you thinking of Rasputin?
No.
Another priest? Oh gosh.
There was, I can't quite remember his name, but he was sort of leading it, and it was like, oh, hello, we're just being peaceful, right? Could we have like a talk with the Tsar? And they were, and so doing the most reasonable thing at the time, the king's sort of like people, the Tsar, shot them.
And they left the snow covered in red, horrible blood.
Which, as you can guess, wasn't a great political move.
No, I can maybe understand why people were a bit upset with that.
Yeah. Well, I did hear somewhere that the Tsar wasn't actually there. He was somewhere else.
Oh, so do you think that they did that without his permission, or did they think they did it because that's what they thought he'd want them to do? Or do you think he'd given them any orders? If anyone comes near the palace, shoot them.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think I remember someone saying...
Don't suppose we'll ever know on that kind of thing, will we?
I'm not sure.
Well, anyway, and a horrific event that's sort of the seed of anger that maybe grew into this full revolution in 1917.
Yeah, so people just sort of kept getting angrier and angrier, but people, I think, got a bit more like, okay, is it nice? A bit more patriotic when Russia joined the First World War.
Right, so that's a good point. So like a bit of a distraction.
Yeah, sort of like a distraction. Like, yeah, I know that the Tsar's been doing all bad, but look, we can go and fight these people and we'll be doing very well, which they didn't.
Maybe they thought if they proved the Tsar that they were useful, he might treat them better after the war.
Yeah.
That's a fair thing to think, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty fair.
So then, as we know, the war was not particularly going well, was it?
No, not really. It didn't go very well for them. And I think Germany kept sort of saying, hey, you can, we'll stop attacking you if you do a bunch of this stuff. Give us a bunch of your land. Which, obviously the Tsar said no.
So there are serious deaths in Russian casualties in both deaths and injuries. There's sort of the pressure that put on, I guess, the Tsar at home. And he's obviously out there fighting or organising this in the trenches, leaving the country to be run by the Tsarina and Rasputin.
Yeah.
And that's caused some tensions at home as well, because I think they thought Rasputin was taking liberties.
Rasputin was very unpopular because it was this random, untidy looking priest guy.
Well, some people would say that his looks were his charm.
Good point. I think there's quite a lot of divide about that. And people just sort of were like, no, this isn't good. Because there was a lot of debate about if Rasputin was actually controlling the Tsar and essentially was making all the decision instead of, I think it was Nicholas.
Yeah, that's it, Tsar Nicholas II. So the reality is he's in France.
Yeah.
He can't make decisions back home. So it was the prince, wasn't it? Prince Yusupov, who killed Rasputin. Which then leaves us in this next position, doesn't it, of this sort of void in Russia? And is that, do you think, where the Bolsheviks thought now is our chance?
Yeah, so Bolshevik, there was, like, after the main revolution, there was, like, a group called the Soviets, who were essentially a bit like the government, and there was, I think, also another group that was sort of the government. Lenin had some ideas which some other people didn't agree with. So him and some other people sort of like split off and called themselves the Bolsheviks and the others the Mensheviks.
Okay.
I think Menshevik means minority.
So are they both communists, these two sort of splinter groups? Or was one more communist than the other?
They're more sort of, I think the Mensheviks were more sort of less hardcore.
Okay.
But
well, that makes sense because the Bolsheviks, as you might go on to talk about in a minute, what they do to that poor Russian royal family.
Yeah.
I suppose some people might say poor, some people might say deserved.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure all of them deserved it.
No, not in such a brutal way. But we'll see if you get onto that in a minute, so I don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah, because I think Menshevik means minority, Bolshevik is majority. Which I find quite funny because quite often the Bolsheviks, meaning majority, were in the minority.
Good old Russians, eh?
Yeah, I think Lenin had quite a large ego. I think all of them had very large egos.
I think you have to be, don't you, to be in that position where you feel that you can take over a country or do something dramatic. You've got to have some confidence in yourself, haven't you?
So about what happened to the Russian royal family, they got moved around a lot. Because there was sort of like a civil war between, I think it was Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. And it was so the Russian royal family were taken down into their cellar and were shot. All of them were shot dead by Bolsheviks.
Oh, so were they, am I right in saying that they were told that they were having a photograph because people in Russia thought they were dead?
Yes.
Because they'd sort of been off the scene for a while. The Bolsheviks captured them and they sort of under arrest. So they went into this cell thinking they were having a photograph. And then that's when they come in and just blew them all away.
Yeah. And they did take a photograph. And it's a very famous photograph that's mainly used as, like, the main picture that you see of the Russian royal family is
the last one.
The last photo.
Oh, it's a bit creepy, isn't it?
Yeah, so the most famous one is their last.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting thing because I think another photograph that you're talking about, I'll put it onto this podcast for the ones listening to this on YouTube, so you can see the last picture before this family were blown away. So that's the end of the monarchy in Russia. Yeah,
that's the end of, I think, around 500 years of Romanov rule.
Wow.
Yeah, very long time for that specific family.
So I suppose now this is getting us, we've had a lovely, nice little bit of backstory there into the new Soviet Union that will become the sort of big player or one of two in the Cold War.
Yeah, because what most people think of as the Soviet Union, which is sort of like you have Russia, Ukraine, or the Baltic states, all that very large landmass, was I think mainly the Baltic states were taken by Stalin because they were weakened after the end of the Second World War, sort of like took advantage of it, swooped in and took.
So did Stalin perhaps think that he'd liberated them or he'd helped them, so he should have them?
Yeah.
That's certainly the case in Poland, isn't it? He felt he got rid of the Nazis there, so he should keep Poland.
Yeah, because it was a dual invasion: Nazis from the west and the Soviets from the east. Just sort of took over and sort of split it. So Stalin thought, oh, well, I helped it, I'll have that.
Mhm.
And he sort of set up Eastern Bloc. That's a bit later. So Lenin died in, I think, the early to mid 1920s. Do you know what the exact year was?
So that sounds about right. So then that led to this power struggle
Yeah,
between Trotsky and Stalin.
yeah, power struggle between, I think, Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. Which, funny enough, Stalin wasn't actually his name. It was a name that he took on during the Russian Revolution that I think roughly means Man of Steel.
Man of Steel, yeah, that is true.
So he's the original Man of
Yeah.
Steel.
There's an ego for you, isn't there?
Yeah. Calling yourself the Man of Steel.
Yeah, well, he was. He went on to be this really
Yeah.
steely guy, didn't he?
Yeah, with an absolutely brilliant mustache. Which is
Indeed.
the only good thing about him, really.
Yeah, I think I agree with that one. They've all seemed to got this mustache identification, haven't they?
Yeah, mustaches were very popular at the time, I think.
Yeah. Especially if you're a dictator.
Yeah, of course. How
Right,
is people going to know?
So this thing, this Stalin's sort of slyness or cleverness in trying to get the people to turn against Trotsky, who I think was probably more popular, wasn't he, than Stalin
Yeah.
was. He lied, didn't he, about the date of Lenin's funeral so that Trotsky was late or didn't turn up, and Stalin could say, look, what kind of guy is this? Didn't even turn up to the great Lenin's funeral.
Yeah.
Yeah, clever that is.
Yeah, then I think Stalin had Lenin embalmed, and so Lenin's body is still on display, I think.
Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?
Yeah, of course, because that's the most reasonable thing.
So how does he get rid of Trotsky in the end? Because obviously Stalin goes on to be the leader of the Soviet Union, but
Yeah.
how do you get rid of Trotsky? This really powerful, popular guy. It involves an ice pick. You know, those things
yeah,
like
I remember now.
on the mountains.
So I think Trotsky sort of like was becoming less popular because of Stalin's quite successful efforts. So I think he fled to somewhere, I'm not 100% sure where, and was killed I think he was hit in the head with an ice pick.
Right in the back of the head.
Yeah, which has a fairly low survival rate, I'd say.
Yeah. Bit of a shock, that one, eh?
Yeah.
I'd say straight to the point, though, eh? Sorry, that's too soon, isn't it? Sorry, fans of Lenin or Trotsky. So anyway, Trotsky's gone. He's out of the way.
Yep, he's out. He's
Full steam ahead to the Cold War.
Yep. Not. So then there was sort of the Second World War, where Stalin was with the Nazis at the beginning, and then Hitler made an incredibly bad decision, which was try and invade the Soviet Union. And he should have learned from everybody else that's tried to invade Russia that if you're going to, you need to pack some winter clothes.
And woolly clothes.
And there was records of like petrol and fuel freezing inside their tanks and vehicles.
Wow. Well, that sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, not really what you want.
So they were going for Stalingrad, is that right? So the
Yeah.
oil and the power is...
Yeah, big. There was a brutal like siege and battles in Stalingrad. But ultimately it was a Soviet victory, although with a great loss
yeah.
on both sides. Actually, the siege was for a very long time.
So a lot of people say, don't they, if the Nazis would have won the Battle of Stalingrad, it would have been over. Because they
Yeah.
would have had all this resources of
Yeah, a lot of power.
oil, the lot. So that's, in a way, whatever you do, don't lose Stalingrad.
Yes.
So in that sense, we can thank Stalin for that.
Yeah, it is vital. Another thing about Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union is that if I remember correctly, it was the biggest land invasion ever, because he got something like over 1 million soldiers and people to try and invade the Soviet Union.
Sounds about right. So that gamble definitely did not pay off.
No, he lost a lot of soldiers, weaponry, materials, vehicles.
Now, is that right in saying, I know it's slightly off topic from the Cold War, is that a little bit why the Nazis and the Nazi military command started to turn against Hitler a little bit in those later years, because they were
Yeah.
losing so badly, and Hitler was like, no, keep going. So
Yeah, because even when they were freezing to death, Hitler kept saying, no, it's fine, keep going.
yeah. And while they're eating each other as well, I've heard that the Germans sort of ate each other.
It was horrible conditions.
And of course, the Russians are used to the cold, aren't they? So it probably wasn't quite as bad for them.
Stalin did quite a good move and sent in special trained troops from Siberia that are specially trained to fight in extreme cold.
Yeah, clever. All right, so that's getting us to the end of this World War II thing then.
Yeah.
So that's a different sort of day or different story, the war ending. Let's sort of get this round to Stalin becomes, I suppose, the second most powerful man in the world next to the American. Or equal, certainly. At the start of the end of the war, they're equal, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because you said they were on Nazi side, but by the end of the war?
By the end of the war, they had switched sides. I think they switched when Nazi Germany invaded them. They sort of like, oh, okay.
That could have that effect, couldn't it?
Yeah. Don't invade your ally. Here's some advice for you. If you're going to make allies with a country, don't then invade them. And especially don't then lose.
Yeah, definitely. So angry Stalin goes, oh, I think I might join the other side.
Yeah, I'll go with them now. Aha.
I wonder how Winston Churchill felt about that. I mean, I suppose
he must have been pretty smug.
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah, and that sort of looks good for the war then. Of course, the Americans then get involved as well.
Everyone's just sort of like, oh, I don't really like you. Aha. And the thing is with Nazi Germany, when you're against that many powerful countries, it's not a good chance of you winning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So at the end of the war, I think in 1945 they have the three biggest at time. I think even at the beginning was Stalin of the Soviet Union, Churchill of the United Kingdom. I think Churchill. It was either Churchill or the US previous one before Truman. Sort of swapped halfway through.
Right. So what you had as the war was coming to an end, you had the big three would be Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, Roosevelt.
Churchill and Stalin.
Yeah.
And then this final conference or meeting, which I presume I think you're going to go on about, is at Potsdam.
Yeah.
And the leadership changed a little bit. So the British Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, replaced Churchill and Truman replaced Roosevelt. So you got Stalin, Truman and Attlee. Stalin probably felt a bit smug there because he'd been there all along, and they got these two new guys. So Stalin probably thought, I can control this meeting.
Yeah.
Maybe he was a bit surprised by Truman, perhaps.
Yeah.
So this last conference, what was that about?
Well, from what it was sort of to figure out what we're gonna do, because the Nazis had control over the majority of Europe. Now suddenly they're gone. We've got a bunch of sort of European chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. And devastation and destruction as well.
Yeah, so they're like, okay, let's sort this out. All right, so who's going to have what? Stalin, you sort of like, you're the most eastern, so you sort of like look after the eastern bits. And Churchill and Roosevelt would do
Western Europe.
Western Europe. But then, of course, it swapped to Attlee and Truman. I like Clement Attlee quite a bit.
Well, to be fair, I think from what we understand about Attlee is he just wants to get home and fix Britain.
Yeah.
Not really be out here messing about with these two.
Yeah, he just wants to get everything sorted out.
Yeah. I mean, it's useful in a way because he gets a lot of money off the Americans, which you may talk about in a bit, the idea that the Americans threw all these dollars, billions of dollars to Europe to fix it, to try and stop the spread of communism.
Yeah.
Or to try and stop Stalin moving across Europe.
So, they divided up Berlin, especially, into different sort of sections controlled by different countries. But the main bits were East Berlin, which was Stalin had, and West, which was sort of like everybody else. Yeah. So you had like Truman and people.
So Britain, France, and America sort of had the West.
Britain, France, and America, the Soviet Union. Which I find quite interesting about Berlin because Germany was a Western bit. So Stalin had this little piece, like several, potentially half a country over from his other places.
So the thing, Ian, is Berlin was in when Germany was split as well. The Berlin was in the Soviet zone.
Yeah.
And the West were a bit like, well, we can't allow them to have Berlin. It's the capital. So then they decided to split Berlin as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sort of like, okay, well, we don't want Stalin to control everything, but we don't want us to control everything, because then Stalin will be like, what you doing?
No, I'm starting to see from what you're telling me some cracks forming in this friendship.
Yeah.
Not sure it's going to last very much longer, is it?
Not really. So there was a big thing about the Cold War is that the majority of it is made up by spying. There's a lot of between the US spying on Soviet Union spying on the US. Everyone's spying on each other and inventing new, more complicated ways of spying.
Like just like a whole era of paranoia.
Yeah.
Of each other.
Yeah, especially Stalin. Stalin was a very paranoid person. And they had a lot of conflicts that were set up. So, especially you had, I'm not sure the exact time bit, but you had Kennan and
Novikov. Yeah, so the telegrams.
Yeah. Which were sort of sending back information. I'm not 100% sure about Novikov, but I know that Kennan sort of wrote big, really long telegram.
It became known as the long telegram because it was much longer than normal like telegrams.
Yeah, sort of saying, all right, here's what I think the Soviets are planning. Here's what we've got to stop them. And I think Novikov was said about that the US are clearly laying foundations to take over everything.
So the two things these two paranoid leaders didn't want to hear is what they heard. I wondered if they actually would have just asked each other, are you planning to do this? Or are you planning to do this? Maybe we wouldn't have had any of the Cold War.
A lot of time and effort could have been avoided if they just said, all right, you know what? Let's just chill. You know, what are you doing? What am I doing? Sort this out.
Oh, what a shame, eh? But to be fair, it's a really good story. So in a way, I'm glad they did and didn't actually use this bomb.
Yeah. They had a lot of bombs. Bombs are a very big part of it, with like Cuban Missile Crisis.
So when you say bombs, maybe just talk a little bit about, we're talking about the atomic bomb here, aren't we? Not just normal bombs. We've got this new weapon that the world has never seen before with super destructive powers that the Americans tested in Japan. Shall we say tested is not the right word, but they used it twice in Japan, which made Stalin feel paranoid because Truman didn't tell him about it. But really that was America's way of saying, we are more powerful than you. Yeah. And the world really was scared of this bomb. It can destroy the world. Yeah. And as this Cold War goes on, I suppose both sides then started building a bigger and bigger and bigger nuclear arsenal of weapons. And that only means one thing, doesn't it? Yeah. The end of humanity.
But they sort of had an agreement. They realised, okay, wait a minute. If they send nukes at us, we send nukes at them, we're both dead.
Exactly.
So there's no point.
So what's that? That's what we call mutually assured destruction, or MAD was the sort of theory of this, wasn't it? That we can't upset each other too much, because if they use it, we'll have to use it. And then that's the end of humanity.
Then everybody's dead, which... So
that's the backdrop of this whole Cold War. Apart from their paranoia, but this bomb, this use of this bomb, we must at all costs avoid using it.
You can threaten to use it as much as you like, as long as you don't. But there's a lot of back and forth between threatening to use big atomic bombs on each other.
I mean, it started off all right at the beginning, didn't it? Because only America had it. Yeah. Then they both put all of their efforts into building these nuclear...
Yeah, a lot of time and money into...
Absolutely.
To send them. So back to sort of East and West Berlin. But Berlin was very badly destroyed from intense fighting there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And East Berlin were seeing like the prosperity of Western Berlin and Western civilization. And so they were like, oh, nice, we'll cross into there. You know, we can cross between the two. And so Stalin didn't really like that, so he sort of introduced a bit of a blockade. He wouldn't let Westerners bring in any supplies into East Berlin. Europe, the East or Western Europe, decided, okay, we can't bring them in by cars or boats or trains, so we're going to fly them in.
Mm-hmm.
So they flew in a lot of supplies.
Well, into West Berlin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess what Stalin's trying to do is starve the West Berliners a little bit to maybe turn on the leaders, the Western leaders. Like, hang on, this is rough, but they were clever enough to fly in and drop all the supplies. So Stalin must have been raging, mustn't he?
Yeah, he wasn't very pleased about it. So he decided, all right, this isn't worth it, and he just sort of stopped the blockade.
So that lasts about 10 months.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, just under a year, wasn't it, that blockade
Yeah,
lasted? So Stalin is that the first time anyone's really lost one of the key events of the Cold War?
Yeah. So that was the first sort of loss of the Cold War.
A bit embarrassing as well for Stalin.
Quite a bit, yeah. And there was... Now, I'm going a few years into the future, I think, to Stalin is now dead.
Sad times.
Yeah.
Or not?
Not really, not particularly.
It was funny how it ended though, wasn't it? Wasn't he having like a heart attack in his room, but he didn't let anyone in?
He was very, very paranoid, so he wouldn't let anybody enter his room. And he tested this by pretending to have an emergency and screaming, help me, please get in here. And so, of course, someone did, and he had them executed.
Nice. So then when he actually was having an emergency, no one went in?
Yeah. So he had a stroke in his room, nobody went in.
I think he deserves it for being like that.
Yeah, and so he died. And it's funny, if they were planning on doing what they did to Lenin, embalming him, displaying him next to Lenin, which they did for a while, and then they realised, no, let's not do that. And they...
Well, I think that's because the next sort of main Soviet leader hated him, didn't he?
Yeah.
Khrushchev. So he's not going to be allowing any embalming of Stalin, is he?
So so the original big three, Stalin, Roosevelt, Churchill, all three of them no more. Now Truman is also now been replaced by Eisenhower, I think, who was wasn't he general?
Yep, in the war.
General Second World War. And so now we've got some new leadership, some fresh faces, finally.
Hopefully good times. Do you think they're going to get on, these two?
Nope, not at all. Not at all.
I was getting hopeful there, Louie.
Don't. So, 1958, I think, the Soviets launched the first satellite, Sputnik.
Sputnik, yeah.
But quite a few people don't know is that Sputnik was a ballistic missile shell that they took the missile out and put a radio transmitter in, which was essentially proving this is essentially a ballistic missile, which means we can send it into space, which will get to you.
Does that mean the Americans got a bit paranoid then, thinking, whoa, we're over in space?
They're like, oh, okay, that's not good. We'd better start putting some effort into this.
Having a bit of a space race.
Yep. They are very, very imaginative naming going on here. They are very imaginative. We've got the long telegram.
Mm-hmm.
Space
race. Well, keep it simple sometimes.
Good point. Keep it nice and simple for us. And there were a lot of different US government peoples and Soviet people saying, okay, this is a good idea. We should put a lot more effort into it. And so now it's a bit later. We have John F. Kennedy, who I like him.
Everyone likes John F. Kennedy.
Everybody. Well, not everyone. I can think of a certain person who didn't like him particularly much.
What, Lee Harvey Oswald?
Yeah, didn't like him that much.
He was working for the Russians. I know he was.
Yeah, it must have been. Everybody likes John F. Kennedy. Everyone. there was a lot of different things. Like, for instance, the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was there was a very angry Cuban man called Fidel Castro, who didn't like the US very much, and so essentially turned to the Soviets and said, "Hey, you hate America, I hate America.
Let's
Be
be
friends."
friends.
Yeah. And so the Soviets put a bunch of their sort of missiles in Cuba, which from Cuba they couldn't quite easily reach America, which made the Americans slightly nervous.
Yeah, as it would do. Oof, what,
Yeah.
90 miles away, I think Cuba is, give or take.
Roughly 90
Yeah.
miles away from Florida.
That could do some damage, couldn't it?
A lot. Especially they had fairly decent range.
Oh, so what? Kennedy's got some work to do here, hasn't he?
Yeah. And something else on the side, at this sort of time, there's a Russian submarine off the coast of Florida that now suddenly thinks that the US have launched a nuclear missile.
Oh, no. So they're going to fire as well.
It's a nuclear submarine which has a nuclear missile on it. 2, now with these Soviet submarines, there were 3 high class individuals. All 3 of them have to agree, yes, let's fire it. 2 out of the 3 individuals said, yes, fire it. The one person that essentially saved the entire world by saying, no, I don't believe it. I don't believe that.
Wow, that's close, isn't it?
Very.
That's actually that's given me a bit scared thoughts, that how close it came to.
Yeah.
And it would have been an accident. The end of humanity would have been Russians
accident.
jumping the gun.
Yeah, bad communication.
Oh, wow. Goodness me.
Yeah, it's quite scary how close. That's probably the closest that it came to kaboom.
Yeah, well, luckily that you're here to talk about it, it didn't.
Yeah, hopefully. It's either that or it's just a bit delayed.
Well, as you're speaking now, I seen yesterday that the doomsday clock, which is this thing that was set up, is apparently set to 90 seconds to midnight.
It's not good.
So when it reaches midnight, it's the end of the world, at the end of humanity, they say.
Oh, dear.
So currently set to 90 seconds, whereas I think in 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis, was it like 2 minutes to it got? And the story you've just described, if that's 2 minutes to, then what is 90 seconds?
I don't know.
Probably best not thinking about it, eh?
Probably, yeah. But
It's all right. People have got GCSEs to do first before that happens, don't worry.
yeah, good. And so there was quite a large controversy about the time because there was a lot of anti-Cuban sentiment that's now come about, which didn't come off great with Mr. Kennedy.
No.
Because there were several photos taken of him smoking Cuban cigars
What a guy.
in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh, I always thought he was a legend, but that has just upped his game even more.
That's just incredible. Absolutely incredible. Top 10 moments of JFK.
I suppose he's just getting ahead of the game there, isn't he?
Yeah.
Too soon for that joke?
Mm-mm.
No, sorry. We'll respectfully stop making jokes about
Yeah.
John F. Kennedy's head.
So, now then, let's move ahead to November.
Oh, Louie, I've just said you can't joke about his head. Shall we move forward to September?
Let's move forward to November 22nd, 1963, where JFK decides to do a bad maneuver by going for a drive in his
Headbutting a bullet.
Lincoln Continental. I know quite a lot about this.
Well, that could be a whole other
Yeah.
episode, JFK. We
Yeah.
love the JFK conspiracy theories.
In his Lincoln Continental, very nice car, with top down, cruising along downtown Dallas, with his route previously published in the morning newspaper.
Genius, isn't it?
Yeah, give you plenty of time to set something up.
Controversial. What are you trying to imply, Louie?
Not a clue.
Not a clue.
Not sure. Just so he's going for a drive past the Texas Book Depository, where a man is waiting with a rifle.
Patiently.
patiently waiting.
Coincidentally.
Of course. He just so happened
Conveniently.
very conveniently. And he fired, I think, 2 shots. One of them went through his neck, sort of went straight through, sort of about here. That's about that. And the other one went straight into his head. Which something about that. He was immediately rushed to a hospital. He was still alive, but not very.
Well, half his brain's in his wife's dress, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the back of the car.
Yeah, and they found a piece of his skull on the road.
Oh, grim.
Yeah.
Grim. That's what you get for smoking Cuban cigars.
Of course.
So, this guy who shot him, Lee Harvey Oswald, am I right in saying that he'd spent some time in Russia in recent years?
Yes. He did.
Is that a coincidence?
Might.
Oh, come on. He's been over in Russia for years and now he goes and kills the president.
Yeah, very convenient timing for that. That's quite a lot of Americans thought at the time. They were like, hang on a minute. He's just come back from the Soviet Union, who we're in this big spy thing with. I
mean, most of them probably hoped it was that rather than their own government.
Yes.
It might have been, would have been too hard to accept that. Yeah. So it's easier to accept that it was some sort of Soviet thing. And then, of course, the propaganda, then you can use that to this, the Soviets have killed our president.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that this is true, what I think, but there was a big thing about how Kennedy was planning to cut CIA spending.
Well, so what do you think, Louie?
Well, there was a big thing about how JFK was planning to cut spending for the CIA.
So the CIA bumped him off, is that what you're saying? Louie's face right now, for those of you that can't see that, this is another episode that we're going to have to come back to one day because controversy is flowing out of Louie's face right now. So let's bring this back to the Cold War before we get in trouble ourselves from the CIA who listen to everything everyone ever says. Can I even say this on this now? We'll be on the internet now, Louie, discussing the potential the CIA could be listening to this. They're coming for you. My name is Jeff and I live in Peterborough. Right.
My name's Donald. I live in Wales.
Yeah, we're in Wales right now, Mr. CIA.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's quickly get to the Cold War.
Yeah, please. So a bit before that, Johnny Boy said that that they're going to go to the moon within the decade, which NASA didn't like. They were like, how?
There's pressure then, isn't it?
Yeah, we're not.
So was he saying that in order to sort of outdo the Soviet space thing?
Yes.
So that as long as America got there first, it would make Soviets look second best.
Yeah.
Okay, come on, Kennedy.
He said that in 1961, so they had 9 years, 8 or 9 years, sort of, to put someone on the moon.
Yeah, thanks for that, boss.
Thanks a lot.
Well, they did, didn't they? 1969.
Yeah, 1969. They after some unsuccessful attempts, launched off. And they knew that something that Neil Armstrong said was that they knew that they could get there, but they didn't know if they could get back.
That's quite a risk. Well, for those regular listeners to ModsPod, we have got another episode in our collection of the conspiracy theory of whether the moon landing was real or faked. So if you want to listen to that, pop over and have a look at that. I think it's episode 2 or 3.
I will.
Right, so we have won the space race because we got to the moon first.
Yep.
All right.
We've won that. Jolly good show. Congratulations. And now we've moved out of the 60s, very stressful time. Hopefully the 70s is going to be all nice and peaceful.
Yeah. You say that. And it was?
Well, it's sort of a bit in between. I don't have my 1970s.
So I can help a little bit there. So this 1970s was a decade we call détente, which basically is a French word that means a thawing of tensions. So relatively quite good. The 70s, everyone the Soviets and America were working hard together. They came up with plans together. They went to the space together. Everything was great. All those early years. And then the Russians, the Soviets, selfishly, crazily, foolishly invaded Afghanistan. which sort of re-kicked off the Cold War again.
Yeah. So they invaded Afghanistan, and the US decided, hey, I know what we're going to do. We're going to get some of these, like, local fighter warriors, going to go up to them and say, hey, you know those Soviet people invading your land? Yeah, why don't you go fight them? Go fight them for it. You can have some supplies and stuff. Off you go. Go fight them. See what happens.
So the Americans basically have created a little of their own army in
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
They did that a lot. Same with Vietnam and Korea. It was all essentially Soviets versus Americans. Like, who would be able to win, essentially.
Is that so the Americans never actually had to get their hands dirty themselves to other people to do it?
Yeah.
So these people in Afghanistan, were they the Mujahideen? With the group they created?
Yeah.
Nice. Good name. So $8 billion, I believe, they funneled into Afghanistan to fight the Russians.
Yeah, a lot of money. And it was just bad decisions from both sides, because it's still not good. Everything is, the effects of the Cold War can still be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So that ended in the end, but it cost a lot of money, re-triggered the whole Cold War, tensions are high again.
Yeah. There's a lot of back and forth between everything, and a lot of countries that were heavily affected that weren't even involved in fighting, like country that sort of, I think, borders Vietnam, called Laos, I think it is.
So over there in Asia, lots of tension going on.
Yep, and it is the most bombed country.
Oh, really?
It is, and it's got a ridiculous amount of landmines in it. Like, they're...
Well, keep that in mind next time we go on holiday to, like, Cambodia or any of those places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'll go, actually. Now you've talked me out of it, Louie, thanks.
Yeah. Jolly good.
Not interested anymore.
Nice. Oh,
so you've introduced us some big stories there of this Cold War.
Yeah.
Poor Kennedy. We'll take a moment. All right, we've had our moment. The sort of went away and then came back. So roughly today, what do you reckon? Are we in a Cold War or are we not? Is this the third Cold War?
Hope not.
The whole Ukraine invasion with Putin, does that make us in a third Cold War?
Hope not. But if there is, I doubt we'd know for quite a while, because it would probably be very secretive, spying on each other again.
Well, we'll know until we know, won't we? When kaboom, 90 seconds to midnight. Sorry. I'm just saying that the doomsday clock is 90 seconds to midnight.
Mm-hmm. If you look outside your window and see sort of like a big flash of light and a mushroom-looking thing.
All right, Louie, let's hope kids aren't listening to this.
Good point. One.
Yeah. It would just mean that someone's put a street light on if you are young and listening to this
someone's
podcast.
Put a street light on.
Oh, dear.
When they're not meant to.
Yeah, so where do you think, if we sort of, are we bringing this episode to a bit of a close, or have you still got a bit more to do?
Bring it to.
So if we bring this episode, this has been interesting. I think when we do your JFK episode, if we try and bring a little bit more Cold War in and maybe talk about the Berlin Wall as well in that episode, because they're all connected, aren't they?
Everything's connected.
And if we could have, by the looks of it, with your Cold War super knowledge, we could have a bit of a series here, couldn't we? Like a different sort of Cold War focus for each one.
Yeah.
Today, I really, really enjoyed the backstory. I'm interested to find out that the Russians and the Nazis were actually working together until they weren't. And maybe Hitler invading brought Stalin onto our side. Was the Cold War have happened had that not happened? History is very interesting in that sense, isn't it? How things could be very different very quickly. So you took us on a bit of a journey there. Some near end experiences, especially that Cuba stuff. All right, so thank you very much, and definitely need to get this next one booked in.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you to everybody else for listening to this episode. Again, hopefully you found that interesting, if not a little bit scary. And remember, CIA, we live in Wales.
Yep, live in Wales.
Thank you very much, and goodbye.